I'm so happy to have Eli Arnold here. Thanks for coming, man. You're like the second of the Portland City Council candidates that I've had on the show, and I want to get more. If anyone's interested, feel free to contact me. You're always welcome on the show. But thanks for coming. I know it's kind of a turbulent week with the storms and everything going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for coming by.
Oh, my pleasure.
Um, you, I was thinking about your name for some reason, and you're like the first Eli I have met or talked to since like school,
Yeah.
like grade school days. And I was just thinking about that. I don't know. And you mentioned you're the
Yeah.
third in a line of Eli's, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of I think it's one of those names, right? Like there's like the trends. And so I've noticed there's a lot of little kids named Eli, it seems like the last few
Nowadays?
years. So I think it might be popping back up.
Coming back. Okay.
But yeah, it's always really confusing when there is an Eli near me because my brain expects they must be talking to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you Gen X? Is that what you consider yourself?
Yeah.
If you're okay saying.
Yeah, I think I'm technically just barely in Gen X.
Okay. I was just checking. So it's popular with that generation, maybe.
Yeah.
Did you ever see the movie The Book of Eli? I'm just curious.
I did. Yeah.
That's an awesome movie, right?
Yeah.
Everyone
It's been a while, but
Okay.
I remember it being pretty good.
Yeah. Denzel Washington.
Yeah, can't go wrong with Denzel Washington.
Yeah. Okay. So since it's topical, I just wanted to talk about this ice storm. Like, first of all, were you fine during this whole time? Were you?
We were pretty lucky in Selwood. I think our power only went out like momentarily.
Was that Friday by any chance? 'Cause that's when I lost
Yeah,
power.
I'm not even sure.
Okay.
It seems like it's been icy for a while. So
I feel like a lot of. Yeah, I was just saying that's your District 4, is that?
that's correct.
Okay. Because I'm a different district, but yeah, I thought kind of like a lot of us lost power at the same time. But what do you think of like how the city handles these kind of winter storms? Because I feel like we get one a year.
Yeah.
And a lot of the same complaints come up about plowing the roads and stuff, salting the roads, and the city kind of always is like, well, because it's so infrequent, we don't invest in this kind of stuff. I'm just curious, like, would you change anything if you were elected, or?
It's like, yeah, it's tough because it always seems like if it's below a certain threshold, it's fine to basically do nothing. But I remember, what was it, 2016?
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like we had like 2 feet of snow and it just shut everything down for a very long time.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at sort of how they budget that out. What's the trade-off? But yeah, I mean, it seems like the last few years we've been having it more and more of an issue. So I don't know if something's shifting, but yeah, it certainly seems like better preparations could have been made this time.
A little more attention to it, maybe.
Yeah, and
future.
I mean, for everything from power to the roads to the whole warming shelter issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just kind of seems like the crisis just hit us.
Yeah.
And we just kind of took it,
No, those are some good points though, because I heard a lot of complaints about the shelter. Like there was a day that they closed the shelters, and then like there was more freezing rain that came back, and it sounded like they weren't really expecting that. And then also for PGE, I heard a lot of people like, I mean, some people were like a week or like 5 days without power, and it's
which is
pretty
super
incredible.
long.
Yeah,
which you can see in that kind of situation, right? I mean, normally we think of the warming shelters mainly for homeless people, but you end up without power for too long.
Yeah,
Everybody
you're gonna be freezing in your own home. Yeah,
needs warmth. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think I've primarily experienced the warming shelter issue since thankfully our power stayed up, but this last week I've had to deal with that some, and I think it's just another example of how our failure to putting kind of structure around homelessness has made it totally unmanageable. And I get that they try to set these, right, okay, it's below this temp, we'll open the shelters, and that creates a weird crossover point, where
threshold.
It's still really not manageable unless you're prepared. Also, with being volunteer run, that's tough, right? Because how do you surprise last second, find hundreds of people all the time? Yeah. But I sort of, with the shelters and with a bunch of surrounding issues, I just think we can add structure to the whole experience of homelessness in Portland that would make it much more manageable. So yeah, that was I have had to help some people get to the hospital this week because they simply were not capable of taking care of themselves.
Yeah.
And then our ambulance service gets completely overloaded, and there are no ambulances available for
Which is
anybody.
something that happens when there's not a storm, right? I mean, yeah.
It's I got to tell you, like 6 7 years ago, never heard of it. Uh, hear of it a lot now.
And that's
Them just not being available.
obviously most people say overdoses is the
O-
reason for that, right?
Overdose is definitely a factor. I think last I saw we're like 500% up
Yeah.
compared to 5 6 years ago. So that's definitely a factor. Additionally, um, again, just the growth in the homeless population. People who have severe addiction or severe mental illness, they use these services at a much higher rate
Mm.
than everybody else. So, their need is stressing the system. And then on top of that, we're still holding on to this two paramedic policy. Willamette Week's
Mm.
done a little reporting on. So unlike Clackamas County, where it's a little easier for them to staff, I guess, because they go one paramedic, one EMT,
Okay.
Multnomah County insists on two paramedics, and they can't find enough.
I see. I've actually never heard of it. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, they Willamette Week did a story a few months ago, I
I'll
think,
have to
on
check
it.
that out.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I talked a little bit to Derek, my guest, yeah, and he knew a lot about EMTs and paramedics and stuff. I didn't even know there was like all these hierarchy of differences between them, and
yeah.
but it is really interesting, especially when the system's stressed.
My son will be very glad to hear I'm talking about this also because he's finishing EMT program
Oh,
in
cool.
March.
Well,
So,
congrats to him. Yeah.
yeah.
um. Yeah. So tell me why you threw your hat in the ring for this race. Like I feel like Kristen sort of gave my name to you. I didn't heard of you until she told me about you, but like to me, and I've said this on the show, as a younger, I'm a millennial, but I feel like there's still such a strong anti-police like sentiment here,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you know way better than me about
I'm
it.
familiar with its nuances. Yeah.
But that's when my first question that popped in my head is like, why would you want to run in that
Yeah.
environment? But obviously you want to see some change. So, but I'm just
Yeah.
curious, like what sparked all this?
Yeah, I think so. One thing is police officers are more connected to political life, I think, than people would probably realize.
Mm.
But you're kind of the end user for policy, right? Whenever we make a rule, there's this final point where enforcement or something happens. And so if there's a crisis, you're there. And if policy is written to address it, you see where it breaks down and where the hangups are. And it's very frustrating. So for years, and I've done a lot of different stuff. So like I've never been somebody who's like I identify completely with my profession
Right, right.
at the moment. But so I've had the experience of trying to work with these issues, homelessness, the rise of fentanyl, vandalism and crime spike and all these other things. And you really see when there's a breakdown. And so I found, a lot of us who are working as police officers, and I've worked downtown as a police officer.
Okay.
And we sit around going, why isn't anybody doing anything about this? And so at some point, I was just kind of looking at how things have changed in the last few years. I feel like the public is ready
Yeah.
for something to change. I think they realize like, oh, we're not actually doing anything.
Yeah. I did want to mention that too.
Yeah.
It's like I do see this anti-police sentiment, but I also see a real need and an ask for a return to livability.
Yeah.
With crime and homelessness and all that stuff. And so yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah.
It's not all anti. I think there's a desire to have police
Mhm.
that are helpful and improving that system.
Yeah. No, I think it's the moment seemed so right for it that I felt like I would regret not at least coming out here and saying what I feel like needs to be said. I didn't hear anybody else saying it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and do it. And then I just had to convince my wife to sign off on that, and she finally came on board.
Okay.
So yeah, just I spent a long time in the Army.
Okay.
So when I joined the Army, I was very young. I've got 4 kids now, but I had a kid, and I got dragged all over the world and kept moving. And we couldn't have friends for more than a year or two because we'd move and move, and sort of saw that like dislocation from community, like how bad that is for people.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also saw like sectarian violence and the breakdown in communities in Afghanistan. And, I just thought this is a really important thing. I'm going to get out of the Army. I'm going to move back to Portland, and I will never move again.
Mm.
And then I'm just going to invest in a place, and my kids will, they'll have a place to finish growing up that they'll be connected to. And all right, so like I'm all in on this is going to be the
Yeah,
place. So
you have a vested interest.
yeah,
Yeah,
and you know, and where the policies break down, I'm the person there looking somebody in the face who's suffering because of it.
yeah, totally.
So yeah, I felt like I kind of had to, that I'd regret it if I didn't, and so here I am.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I was gonna mention like I'm not gonna name names, but like I see a lot of younger candidates running who maybe haven't been on the street like you have, seeing these problems in reality as opposed to like written on into a law or on a
Yeah,
page. And I see them making videos on TikTok or just tweeting out stuff
yeah.
and they do go to meetings and stuff, but it's like I personally would much rather vote for somebody who has like on the ground experience with all of these problems. And it definitely seems like you do.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I think part of the dysfunction with our city government in the last few years has been a lack of like the nuanced understanding that comes from actually like seeing a thing up close.
Yeah.
And so, like the camping ban that's held up, like completely unworkable because it was written by people who don't actually understand the part where you would go do the thing.
You get to the sidewalk or whatever and like
Yeah,
have to make a decision.
and so they're fighting about it in court, but like even if the court says fine, it's not actually useful.
Yeah.
And so we've been very, ideology driven for a long time, and I think you can just see that in the lack of like, practical, like real progress.
Yeah.
So we've made a lot of policies, we've declared a lot of emergencies, but we have more homeless people than we ever had. Even after all this spending, our crime went up. So
Yeah.
and one cool thing about the big city council is that should make it possible to bring in a lot of different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't just have lawyers. We should be able to have people who, are educators, people who do deal with legal stuff or policy stuff. I think somebody should probably be from public safety,
Yeah.
given
Yeah.
what we're dealing with right now. So I'm hoping that, yeah, we end up with kind of like a broad
Yeah.
background.
Well, it seemed like it because one of the things I was going to ask you when I was asking you a second ago of like why you're running is like considering the makeup of what that council might eventually be. But you kind of just answered that of like
Yeah.
you're the one voice for that's actually been on public safety that can kind of speak up for them and
Yeah.
or can just speak to the issue at all. But yeah. So yeah, we kind of talked about it a second ago, but tell me about because you tweeted or posted about the Martin versus Boise thing.
Mhm.
I'm just curious, like, and now there's this case where I'm from, City of Grants Pass versus something I can't remember, but it's going to the Supreme Court. It sounds like.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, break that down for people and like what that case means on the ground and.
So basically, the Ninth Circuit's a federal court, covers the West Coast, and the Ninth Circuit ruled that you can't enforce camping bans unless you have a place for people to go.
Shelter.
And
Yeah.
yes, I mean just something.
Yeah.
The standard's not even super high. It's just you can't say you can't be anywhere.
Okay.
So the Supreme Court will be reviewing it because right now that standard doesn't apply in the rest of the country. So we're operating
Only
on
in
two.
that circuit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
only under the Ninth Circuit. So it'll be interesting to see. I assume they'll probably weaken that, but that's just a guess. And really, I don't want to depend on that or worry about that or whatever. I think, well, I'm kind of stunned that the city hasn't just said, okay, let's comply with Martin v. Boise, and so we can have some kind of, rules and structure and start taking care of some stuff, because it's been years and we've just done nothing. And I think part of that's the being ideologically driven has led us to talk about it as like a housing affordability crisis only. And it's led us to really prioritizing housing first. And, really, I deal with homeless people every day, and it's like treating it like a single group just makes it impossible to deal with the problem. Somebody who has severe schizophrenia is unmedicated needs a different intervention than somebody who's a fentanyl addict. And, if you're a single mom and you've gotten divorced and you're struggling to pay rent, you're ready to accept a different kind of help.
Yeah, I'm sure, especially downtown, I was thinking you probably have the whole range of different coherence, like people that are just fully coherent, not on drugs, and then there's people who are addicts, and I don't know. So yeah, like different treatments and different ways to handle all those situations, right?
Yeah. And I see people repeatedly cycle into housing and pop back out.
Okay.
And because the issue isn't resolved. And so housing alone, isn't working for them.
One piece of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think Martin v. Boise, we've spent a lot of money trying to deal with homelessness, and it's not really working. Like I said, we have not decreased the number of homeless people. And I think part of that is that we haven't created the conditions in which that money can work. So I favor creating spaces and like very quick, low cost. Okay, let's just say here's where you can be. And so what I would like to see is some designated spaces. Once we have those spaces, we say no more unregulated camping. We can provide basic sanitation, garbage services. And so we show up to clean up camps and we say, hey, we got a space for you. We will register it to you by name. You won't get swept anymore. And then your social worker, your family, your PO, whoever, whatever supports you have will know where you are. Built for Zero, which was the goal to identify all these people by name and their issues by name, which we definitely need to finish. That makes that so much easier. If you don't have any continuity of care, if you can't find the person, like how are you going to help them? And man, it impacts so many things. If you have a homeless victim of a crime, how do you get them to trial?
Yeah.
You can't. And so they're often victimized and nothing can be done because you can't get them to the trial. So I think stabilizing the population creates the conditions for making progress. And, it should not have taken years to try complying with Martin v. Boise.
Yeah.
So
I was thinking when you were talking just now, what you remember the whole Wapato jail thing? I was just curious, because I think about that now and I'm kind of like, man, that seemed like, it just seems more and more appealing as time goes on. Because I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I hear people now like, oh, this shelter's great because it's so kind of removed from all of like the addictive properties that they might, addicts might come back to. And it seemed like an all-in-one kind of center, which is a new thing I see happening more. But I don't know, how did you feel about that back then and now? And
well, I mean, first of all, the whole story seemed a little crazy with the amount of money that was spent, and then the property was just given up on.
It's just sitting there.
But as I understand it now, right, Bobby Lakes is running it as like a high support.
Okay, that's the same.
I haven't been out there and toured it.
Okay.
But my understanding was it was now for people who are really ready to get.
Yeah, well, I hear great things about it.
I think they've been struggling with funding. Locking of funding while the county's been sitting on like unspent money. Okay. So I think that was the most recent story. But I could be wrong. Like I said, I haven't actually been out and toured it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a shelter now in what used to be the Greyhound station downtown. Okay. And right outside of that, you get a lot of fentanyl dealing and use.
I'd imagine, yeah.
And I've gotten complaints from the people who are running programs there. There's also a Central City Concern building across the street that they're trying to run like addiction recovery programs, and these people are, right, they walk right back out into the middle of a group of people who are using, and that's tough conditions.
Yeah, well, I remember because I used to like use the bus station even before it was a center, and even back then it was bad. So I can only imagine now. Yeah. But yeah, I still can't believe like that's like your beat is that whole area and all of downtown, or just.
I've spent the last 2 years. I mean, I've worked all of downtown Inner East Side, but the last 2 years I have really focused on in between 405 and the river. Okay. Sort of Chinatown, Old Town.
Yeah,
and I've primarily been dealing with fentanyl related issues. Mm-hmm. And it's been interesting to see the rise. It's been frustrating to see. Yeah. That people are kind of by default just let straight back out of jail and go right back to it.
Well, and it's also like even before like the Greyhound or whatever it is now, like I remember that was like TPI's down, or is it TPI or
one right across the street there, Bud Clark Commons.
Bud Clark, that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah. It's just like a lot of that stuff is really centralized down there. So it seems seems good and bad at the same time, I guess.
It creates a very unusual environment because you
Yeah,
do have so many, like the people with the most extreme problems are kind of concentrated into a small area.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Um, can we talk about, since we are talking about downtown, what do you think of the downtown task force and how that's been going with, I believe the governor and everyone,
Yeah.
right, is involved with that?
I've spoken to a few people who have been involved with it. I haven't sat in there. It sounded. I appreciate that the governor's. Okay, let's try some stuff. Let's try to figure some things out.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to see that. Um, and I think they came out with their recommendations recently, which were like, we got to ban public drug use.
Hmm.
Right, we need some more police services.
It's all kind of like NODA
Some
kind of
business
stuff.
revitalization stuff. Yeah, I mean, it all sounded like, yeah,
Yeah. These would be
we
good to have. Yeah.
could we have done that last year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you see like a shift happening from that, or do you notice anything
Um,
improving or?
I I don't know that they've actually enacted any
Okay.
changes yet.
It's more of just meetings
I do
and,
know that the governor deployed some state police
okay.
resources
OSP.
to downtown to help out. And I think I have seen some progress on the fentanyl front downtown recently. Um, in trying to separate dealers from like the
Okay.
homeless population.
That's what I was wondering,
So
like busting dealers kind of thing, or
yeah, a tremendous number of them have been busted in the last year,
wow.
and it's kind of frustrating. So Senate Bill 48, which was the bail reform bill, and I'm all for bail reform. Like, don't hold people in jail based on how much money they have,
Yeah.
right? Make it based on whether they're a danger to the community. But the local presiding judge came out with her release orders, and they basically say you're a fentanyl dealer and you've got 900 doses of fentanyl on you, and you're arrested. You're probably going right back out.
Yeah.
And in my experience, they go right back to selling fentanyl.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
And so that's it's frustrating because unlike basically every other drug, that they're killing people. They know that they're killing people like
Yeah.
now, and so to treat it like it's not violent in the same way that maybe like selling marijuana, would have been.
Mhm.
I don't think it's equivalent.
When it's so cheap too. I mean,
Yeah,
I was just thinking about that. Like, did you see a transition from? Were you always on that same downtown area? Were you working that?
pretty much. Yeah,
Okay. Because I would think it would go from meth or heroin to what it is now, or
yeah. It
something like.
used to be a lot of meth and heroin, and fentanyl pretty much drove heroin out entirely,
Yeah.
and it certainly reduced the amount of meth
But
that
it's
you
I do
see.
still hear, yeah,
There's
it's
still meth
around.
around,
Yeah.
but you don't see it as much as you used to. It's really displaced the other drugs.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah, that's
and
just
it is extremely cheap, and you can just see that like the addiction timeline seems so much quicker.
yeah.
Um,
Because that's what I've always heard is that it is the most addictive drug on the planet. That's what I always kind of call it.
the
It's like,
barrier to use is a lot lower than say heroin. Like all you need is some foil.
yeah.
I think the needle itself kept some people
Totally.
away,
Yeah.
but
Scared some people off, maybe,
yeah, at $1 a pill, and just needing a little bit of foil,
and a lighter. Yeah.
you'll see 18-year-olds down there, completely hooked on it.
Wow.
So clearly we ought to be doing something differently.
Yeah.
Um, I would definitely like to see the state come through on the whole public use ban.
Hmm.
I actually I love the idea of treating drug addiction as like a health and mental health problem, because it is. But my main concern is like how do we get people who can no longer seek help for themselves to help? And historically, that was because it was a crime, we could intervene. And so we need to retain the ability to intervene. However we get that.
Right.
But I would hope, if I lose free will because of a chemical, please help me. Even if I'm not ready to accept it. And the same for, my family. And so I think we need that. And on the other side, we need to minimize the negative impacts. We don't need to, like, right now, there's not much stopping people from smoking fentanyl like in front of a preschool,
Right. Right.
you know?
And I've
And
seen videos like of people doing it downtown in the daytime, and
oh yeah, they're not worried about it. And if you have a block and there's people smoking fentanyl down the sidewalk, that block is effectively closed, to somebody pushing a stroller.
Yeah.
Like that public space has been taken away. So we we need more ability to intervene
Yeah. Yeah.
to prevent that. So I would love to see the public use ban.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking earlier too, it is really, um, like I never thought about it. I guess when it's all in this like circuit, Ninth Circuit issue, and that makes sense when you look at San Francisco and all these cities that are in that
Yeah,
territory. They all struggle with that same livability kind of issue.
yeah, and they kind of similarly have all just become like they all got paralyzed.
Yeah,
Like they didn't
they're in a state of
do anything.
like a state of just freeze or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's clearly not working.
paralysis.
So we should try something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely should. Yeah, I mean it's been going on a long time. It's one thing that I was gonna say too is like I see a lot of candidates running in this city council race that are like, and maybe it's because I'm getting older now, but
yeah,
it's just the same tired ideas I've heard for like 20 years, um, and I think maybe because they're younger, it's new to them. But like I hear this stuff, and I'm like, yeah, we've been trying this and been pouring money into this stuff for a long time, and it doesn't work. Um, so, but I think like you're saying, I do think hopefully the size of the council will help that because you can kind of get a variety of viewpoints and opinions, and
hopefully. For in the sort of trying the same thing, and uh, there was a really good interview with Andy Mendenhall.
okay,
He is head of Central City Concern. He's a doctor.
okay,
He was recently interviewed by, I believe, Willamette Week about what are they seeing, and
I
he
might
talked
have read,
about declining success rates in
yeah,
drug treatment. Housing first comes up a lot. He talked about why the sort of visible long-term tent camping population, like why that's probably not going
mm,
to work with them. And so it was just, here's a guy who's on the treatment and help side, and it was great to see him give what to me, from my experience, sounded like a very like accurate picture
mm,
of the struggles. So yeah, instead of the general ideological
right,
kind
right.
of
It's all
vague,
theory,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and like yeah, it's so important once you spend time face to face with something, you can see the nuance.
yeah,
And so I really recommend that
yeah.
interview.
I'll have to check that out. I was thinking of another one that Nigel Jacobs did, but I think it was an interview with a guy who used to do like the VA hospital. He was like a mental health doctor. He's very old, but he's seen like this change uh, in Portland and the metro area. But I'll have to check that one out because that sounds even more interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Tell me about modern policing and like your thoughts on, because I feel like you're kind of in the modern era now of
Sure.
like,
I became
uh,
a cop right after Ferguson.
okay,
Yeah.
which is a lot like I was working the news during that time, and a lot of people feel like George Floyd was like the big thing, but I remember like there was all these other events leading up to that, so
Yeah.
that's interesting that you got in then.
Yeah. Policing, it's been interesting to learn about. Like I said, this is my like second career. I was, 37
When you
when I
started,
started.
wow,
So, yeah, an interesting history. So, my basic overview of policing for the U.S. is essentially there were no rules up until like the 80s. Around the 80s,
okay,
the Supreme Court started weighing in and saying we should probably have some rules.
okay,
And since then, it's been a gradual move toward, regulating and figuring out,
hmm,
how ought we do this.
yeah,
And some, because of the way the U.S. works, every single police force in the country is operating under different rules.
yeah. I was just thinking
Yeah,
that some kind of uniform structure.
it's not like a European country with a federal police force. So one of the tough things is that, um, a police agency under the Ninth Circuit follows different rules, than an East Coast police agency, and even within an area. Vancouver, Washington operates under different laws than Portland
Sure,
does, and different case law, and
and that's 10 miles away or whatever. Yeah,
yeah. So it's an interesting thing. It's a highly local profession, and it's very tough for the public, I think, to understand
understand all
all
those politics of
and the
yeah,
differences, and like because yeah, how would you? So it's been interesting to sort of see that and learn about it. Yeah, so I started doing it um, after Ferguson, and I, I think I had the mentality at the time. I'm like, oh, well, first of all, this is a really important thing, right? And I'm looking for something post-military. What am I going to do that's community-oriented, that's important, that, where I've got some capacity to go out and like make change and do things. And I'd gone on a ride along some years prior, which really changed the way I looked at the job. I, as a teenager and everything, did not have a high opinion
Yeah, yeah.
of the profession. And I went on this ride along, and the amount of like freedom uh, that this cop had to just decide what needed to be done. Like, and I remember we went to a guy's house, and he was feeling, or maybe suicidal, maybe just depressed. Something was up, but no hesitation. We talked to this guy for like an hour. It was just
Mm.
like, you know what, this is an important thing that's worth doing right now. We just do it. Nobody's checking the time. So I just thought, it's crazy to have that much freedom to try to find what needs to be done and get to go do it. So I had this mindset too of, obviously we're seeing all these videos and stuff. Things are very broken. I'm gonna go in here and do a great job. Fix things up. And what I actually found when I got to both the State Academy and then to Portland was I was really impressed actually. Portland really is at like the leading edge of all these reforms. A lot of the forms the other countries other parts of the country are still dealing with are things that like Portland started doing 20 years ago.
Mm.
So I was really impressed. I'm very impressed with the people that I met at Portland, and it's just still a rapidly changing thing.
Yeah.
I don't know what the current average number of years on for a cop in Portland is, but it is a massive turnover every 10 years.
Okay.
So
I've heard about that a long time. Like,
yeah,
there's the drop off of people retiring. Is that what you're talking about?
yeah, there's lots of retirements, and I think just people switching to other agencies or whatever. There's tons of people who have similar amount of time, right? So tons of cops who came in around Ferguson,
Okay.
who've sort of gone through all this same stuff, and so yeah, I think there's been a real updating in the
Mm.
last 10 years of
There's like this whole new generation
yeah,
that came in.
and change in outlook. And so anybody who is curious about it, wherever you live, I would highly recommend go on a ride along,
Yeah.
see what your neighborhood looks like. You will. I've never met anybody who went on a ride along who didn't come away like
With the
very
same
sort of
exact.
surprised and
Yeah.
like with a just able to look at surrounding issues in a new way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great suggestion. Because yeah, I do think that's interesting too that you did you mean before you joined you were kind of like as a young man like not anti-police but you didn't
Yeah.
see them the same way as you do
I
now.
always thought of them as like high school football players who didn't have
Yeah.
like a cleared line for like
Yeah.
a profession. And,
It's like it's a good
I had some
stereotype of it. Yeah.
minor, just annoying interactions when I was like a teenager. And,
Yeah. You get kind of mad and yeah.
I just kind of stayed how I viewed it until I went on that ride along,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like I mentioned earlier that people want this like they don't want to say they want more policing, but they want livability.
Yeah.
And I think they understand on some level that requires policing.
Yeah.
And I think people in Portland, to me at least, are seeing that or understanding that more
I mean, Portland absolutely needs more police.
as far
So,
as staffing. And
people always talk about the whole, did Portland police get defunded in, 2020, whatever, and they'll argue back and forth online. Like, doesn't even matter.
yeah.
The real story is in 2002, there were 1.8 police officers per thousand people in the city. The city kept growing. The city did not grow the police force. Now there's 1.2.
Hmm.
So, it shrank relative to the city. It was basically just starved as the city grew. And so now we're dealing with 2/3
Yeah.
the police force. And, and with a spike in homicides and everything else. And I've gotten to see a lot of the frustrations people have, and I've had them too. I've had to call 911. It's frustrating to be
Yeah.
on hold.
Yeah.
Very frustrating. And to know, like, oh man, it's going to take a while before somebody gets here to respond to this thing. And so people are very frustrated, and I think understandably so. It's this thing needs to be appropriately sized to do the work that it needs to do, and right now it isn't.
I was thinking, yeah, two things about what you were just saying. Because I've heard the newest stat, the 1.2 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't remember the other one. So just say that one more time. What was that? 2002.
2002. Yeah.
Okay.
So we actually
We
had
had
more
about,
police officers in 2002. And if you've been around the last 20 years in Portland, the city's grown
yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I believe it's 1.8 per thousand then.
Okay.
Now we're down to about 1.2.
Okay.
So
I just wanted to reiterate because that is a wild
it
shift.
would take about, I think, 300 more police officers to put us back to the ratio that we had.
Into that range.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And we are at the bottom, like, for the country.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
It's
either
us
dead last
and like San Jose
or one other. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but especially you look at an East Coast city, like they're running double.
Yeah.
You know,
NYPD or something like that, or
almost anywhere.
yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I was just thinking, what you were saying with the 911 call times. Do you see that a lot downtown? Because I feel like I've heard that with business owners. Like they kind of eventually just gave up because they're like, I can't wait an hour if somebody's breaking in or whatever to.
Yeah.
Like they're gone by that point,
Yeah. I mean, the response times, both.
And I'm not saying police, but also 911.
I mean, yeah, the whole system.
Yeah.
The whole system gets overloaded very easily, which is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating. I've known the frustration as a caller. I've known the frustration as somebody who has seen a call and like holding and then like, man, somebody should really be going to help those people right now, but there is no one.
Yeah.
So, we have to fix it. And I think part of what we have to do is we have to convince people. We got to create the positions, and we have to convince people that, live here with your family, choose to be in Portland. It's a very competitive job market for police officers in the country at this point. Everybody's hurting for them.
Yeah.
Given our history of sort of sentiment, yeah, we need to convince people that we value this work. We want you to be here, move here, live here with your family, and we got to create the positions and fill them.
Yeah,
and it takes time because of the length of background checks, the length of training. You don't fully get somebody out and working until maybe 2 years until after they put that application in.
Because there's the academy and all that.
Yeah,
one of my family members is in the police bureau, and I remember like 2 years ago having this conversation of like it's gonna take like a decade to get the staff to where it needs to be. But I wanted to ask you too about, because you mentioned the homicide rate. I hear a lot from young people because I bring it up, and I'm not kidding when I said there was just one 2 days ago over here on 82nd. And I hear a lot from young people of like, well, that's just big city problems. And I try to tell them like per capita and for our size, like it's still a rate that is pretty high.
Sure.
But I'm just curious, like what
the most recent news that people kind of grabbed onto is that it went down a little in 2023 versus 2022, which is great.
Dip or something. Yeah.
But if we go back to 2018 or something, we had a jump that was like 300%, a massive jump. And people will totally tell you, oh, that happened everywhere. Most of the country did see an increase, but they saw 20% increases, 40% increases. We had the biggest increase. Nobody had a 300% increase. So that means that we did something different to get an effect that was so drastically different. Historically, Portland had a very low homicide rate and is a low violence city, and we should try to keep that. I mean, I don't know. Saying that other places are more violent doesn't help people who get killed or suffer.
I just don't get that. When I hear that, because I'm like, first of all, we're not New York City.
Yeah.
And second of all, I don't know. Maybe that's just, I remember the days of when we had like, I don't know, 10 a year or whatever. I don't know how low it was, but certainly not what it is now.
It was much lower a few years ago.
Yeah.
And we can probably get it back there.
Yeah.
But we are going to have to change some things.
I had another thought in there. Oh yeah. Because you kind of touched on recruiting.
Yeah.
And maybe you've been through that newest form of that. Do you feel like it's where it needs to be now as far as police recruiting, or would you like to see other things happening?
I haven't, obviously it's been a few years since I've been through the process. They're always fine tuning it. So I can't speak to like the details, but I think the main thing is we need to be constantly recruiting. Uh, Part of the problem we had with retirements was there used to be this like recruit for a couple of years, put it on pause for a couple of years, and so it
Okay.
created these like sudden drop offs.
These little waves.
Yeah. So we need to be constantly doing it. We need to. I would like to see those positions. Let's just go ahead and create them. They'll sit unfilled for a while, but again, we need to signal to people. We now recognize what we need. We want you to do this job. Here's a great first signal that doesn't actually cost anything until we fill those positions.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, as much recruiting as we can do.
yeah.
It's tough because you got to really thoroughly vet people. It doesn't take many to damage a reputation. So you got to be very thorough. They got to go through a long sort of training process, but it only gets worse every day we wait. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I was thinking about that because I don't know if they're still doing it, but I thought what Florida did was really cool. They have like a state level, some kind of monetary incentive. Like if you move
mm,
here to be a police officer, we'll give you some thousand amount of dollars or something. I can't
yeah,
remember what it was. I would love to see more because most of the population is up here, like a state level thing like that or something to incentivize it or just incentivize it in
you know
general.
what? There's some work we got to do. We got to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
So whatever that takes.
Yeah.
And people literally are dying due to insufficient capacity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that seems like a good reason to get to work to me.
And that's something too. I don't know. I just thought of this, but like I've heard people literally say to me they think that's a purposeful thing. They'll be like, "Well, that's just
Oh, right. Yeah, I've
police
seen
police
people.
slow walking on
Yeah, yeah.
purpose," and um, I don't know what to say to those people. But
Yeah, I doubt you could do much convincing. I actually met a guy recently who had the same feeling, and he actually went on a ride along, and he was, I
kind
was
of
like, oh,
changed.
okay.
Okay.
I guess, once you see the there's stuff happening, and there's just literally nobody available.
Yeah.
So if you look at the number of calls police respond to in the city, it hasn't gone down.
Yeah.
There's still hundreds of thousands of them. Um,
And that's an easy way to kind of track
yeah,
that criticism, I guess, of like you
yeah.
still get all these calls and they're responding to them.
But are people getting the service they should get? They're not, because there aren't enough people. There's not. So it essentially creates like a triage situation
Yeah.
where you're like, well, let's fix this in the moment. But is there the capacity to do the follow up that should be happening to really try to track people down and solve crimes and all that? It's hard to do that back end work when the next
Mm-hmm. It's so
dangerous event is
immediate.
already kicking off.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I understand people being frustrated. Again, I'd recommend a ride along, and we're gonna keep being frustrated until we fix the sort of just the root capacity problem.
Yeah. Where I was thinking too, I this happened to me and maybe a few people I know of. Like, and this is like back in 2013, but I had my car stolen up here back then, and even at that time, I probably didn't have the highest opinion of police.
Yeah,
But I was amazed 2 days later they found it. I thought it had been stripped and like it
yeah.
was gone. But this officer was like, "Yeah, we found it. It was like 10 blocks away from my house. It was spray painted."
Oh yeah, they did the spray paint thing. Huh?
Something, I don't know. He's like, they probably were just doing drugs and stole it.
Yeah,
But um but I was just amazed. I was like, thank you for like getting my car back. Like and that kind
yeah,
of changed my opinion. So I feel like when people have something that lands in their front yard or just in their life,
yeah,
that kind of changes their opinion because they're like, oh, somebody actually wants to help me
yeah.
with this problem. But
Well, I'm glad they found your car. This is the only city I've ever lived in. I've lived all over where I've ever had a car stolen.
okay.
Yeah,
That is kind of interesting. Yeah.
I was way too young and poor to have my car stolen. It was a real crisis.
Yeah, and that's why I was like, maybe that changed my opinion because I just assumed it was gone, and
Mhm.
I know for a lot of people it does impact their life in a huge way.
I had like a newborn baby. I
No,
have no
no
car now.
vehicle. Yeah.
I have liability insurance. So like I just lost a car,
Damn. Yeah, that is.
and yeah. So that's who really gets hurt by all
Yeah.
this stuff, right? It's
Yeah.
the single mom who needs to get to work.
Yeah, or even people.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who had their catalytic converter stolen. Same thing. It's like I can't afford.
Also,
Yeah. Yeah. Some
Yeah.
people like that's a huge, they don't have emergency savings for that or anything. And
Yeah.
but yeah, um, can we talk about the new city council format? Like, what did you think of that change? Was it because in my mind it was like when I worked for the news for many years, it was needed. Like this was an old 1800s commission form of government.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm just like, do you like this new format, and that's why you kind of started running, or
I really wanted a city manager.
okay, yeah.
I feel like the idea of sort of putting politicians in charge of specific bureaus is just weird.
Mm.
You know, what what does
Assigning
this
them,
person know
yeah,
about roads?
yeah,
Just because they were able to win an election. So I like the idea of a professional city manager for operations.
because that is a piece of this new thing, right? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Now it's critical we get a good city manager because this person's going to be very important.
yeah,
Um, but beyond that, I I think we're just going to see.
yeah,
Like, so it's I can see some potential upsides, some things I'm like hopeful about. 12 people, like I said before, we should be able to get a wide range of experience.
hmm
Um, I think electing three in a district is interesting because it will sort of allow maybe more people to have a voice because you're going to get you know three different candidates, and
yeah,
maybe this group would never be represented in an all or nothing one person kind of deal. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out in terms of like, do we end up with sort of like lanes?
yeah,
Do we end up with a left, center, right in every district? I think it's going to be a really like wild election, and it's going to be very interesting to see how this turns out.
yeah.
And I don't exactly know how it will.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
totally agree. I was texting a friend of mine the other day. I'm like, not only that, but the national election. I'm just like, buckle up
Oh,
because this is going to be a
yeah.
wild year as far
That
as
I really wish the national one wasn't
at the same time.
at the same
Yeah.
time. Oh man, it's interesting though because districts 3 and 4 are only doing 2 years. Districts 3 and 4 are always going to be not like midterm elections.
Also, they'll be kind of
So
alternating.
1 and 2 will always be tied to the presidential elections,
Wow.
but 3 and 4 won't, which is, I think, maybe fundamentally changes who
That is,
votes
yeah,
depending on where you are in the city.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah. I learn about all new stuff about this like new city form all the time. Like I just saw a thing the other day of what the ranked voting ballot would look like. Because like a lot of this stuff I talk about with people, but I've never actually seen it like when it comes in the
Yeah.
mail or whatever. But it's just weird when you actually see like, okay, this is what it's gonna be like, and we'll see how this goes. And
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's going to be, unlike a normal election too, where you could like poll effectively. Like, I don't know how you'd poll for this.
Yeah,
So
because
I
it's
don't think
brand new.
anybody's going to know.
Yeah,
Too many
yeah,
possible scenarios.
that's a good point. Yeah. All right, I'm flipping this over. uh, where just tell people where they can donate because actually before we do that, I wanted to ask because they just changed the thing this week about
Oh yeah.
matching and all that. I'm curious your take on it as a candidate.
Yeah. So I'm enrolled in the small donor election program. I think everybody is. And basically that puts caps on how much money you can take. Except for seed money, you can't take money from businesses. So it does all this stuff. And what it gives you in return is an incentive to seek out Portland residents
Mm-hmm.
for donations. So up to $20 is matched 9-1 from Portland residents. And you're required to get 250 Portland donors to qualify for that money. So originally, that matching funds capped out at like 300,000, and since there's going to be like 100 candidates, uh, they're going to need way more money than anybody could have ever expected. And apparently, city council's not coughing up extra money, I guess, and so they're lowering those caps to.
I think it's like 100.
I think 120,000 is the new
Yeah.
max. And for some reason, they just dropped the mayor cap below the city council race cap, which is even weirder.
Yeah.
For me personally, like it doesn't bother me, right? Like I understand. I think it's a cool program. I like that it makes $20 valuable, and go out and meet lots of people. So I think it's still, providing that function,
Yeah.
still incentivizing it. Maybe not quite as much as it was before, but it's still doing it. And I know some people are complaining that like they hired staff and they did all these things already, even though we're like a year out.
Mm.
And you know, I just think the idea that it's like an unlimited um, obligation from the public, no matter how many people join in, you know, seems a little silly. So, you know, I don't mind. As long as we're all playing by the same rules.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
no big deal.
Yeah, I was just curious, like, because I've heard from a lot of candidates, everyone just seems to complain about it in some way.
Yeah,
But
I've noticed that.
yeah,
And yeah, we're playing the same rules.
yeah.
Like, all right.
I still think it's cool, and I'll probably get some flack for it. But I don't know. I think it's cool versus like what I saw growing up. A lot of just like these people getting like corporate donations or just rich friends of theirs, and this is a good way at a grassroots level to get
Yeah.
anybody match donations, and so I think it is cool. I just worry about where that ends, and obviously the caps were part of that solution. I guess they
Yeah.
saw, but yeah,
I think it's an interesting program, and I think it totally opens up right the race to people who aren't wealthy.
yeah, exactly, yeah,
Uh,
that's the
and
idea, and
yeah,
I feel like for whatever reason this week people kind of forgot about that. Like in my mind, it's still like that's the whole idea behind it is to
yeah,
allow non elite wealthy people to get in any race.
yeah.
So
And I think you still run a campaign with the new caps because, especially for city council, you're only running a fourth of the city. Social media is everywhere
yeah,
and is free, and so you know just got to get out and start talking to people.
yeah,
And you can still reach them, but yeah, maybe you got to do a little more unpaid
a little legwork.
legwork. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to donate, where do people go? Just your website or any
Yep.
of your
My
socials?
website's eliforportland.com, and that's with the FOR, not the number 4.
Okay.
So eliforportland.com, or you know, you can find Instagram. Everything else is also Eli for Portland, and you'll find a donate option on the page there.
Nice. That's
And
cool. You got all the same
I'd
handle.
really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you
That's task number 1 in legitimacy and you know, financial footing. So
yeah, yeah.
we're off to a good start, but love to close it out as soon as possible so I can focus on other stuff.
Totally, yeah. And I don't know. Like I said, I think it's a great way for people to get involved just as citizens. Like if you like anyone that you see in this race, just donate. Because I always forget what it 20 is the minimum, right?
No,
Or
you can donate $5,
but
and
I mean
that's still
for
matched 9-1. 20 is the max that gets matched.
I see. Okay.
So you can donate up to $350, but at 20, the city will match 9-1,
9 to 1. I got you.
and then after that, you're just adding on yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Tell me your Northwest story, because you mentioned, I think you were overseas for a while.
Yeah. So
But did you grow up here before that, or?
I grew up in California.
Okay.
My dad, my parents got divorced when I was like 13, and my dad was living up here.
Okay.
So I started, you know, coming up here
Yeah.
some when I was a teenager. And we lived in a tiny town in California, and he lived downtown in one of those tall apartment buildings. And I thought it was, you know, really cool.
Yeah. That's
Come
funny
up
because
and walk around and
that's kind of basically except my older siblings lived up here.
yeah,
And I started coming up here and I was like, it's so cool in the city. And I was in a small town, but that's
Yeah.
interesting. Same thing.
yeah. So yeah, 21. I was just like, you know, I kind of moved around a little, was kind of exploring, and I thought, oh, let's go try Portland.
Okay.
So moved up here, met my wife. She's from Lentz, and
Oh, wow, yeah.
yeah, we had a baby, and then I was like, man, we cannot afford to live here with a kid, working in restaurants. We got to get some health insurance and education and everything else.
Yeah.
So decided to join the Army, and spent a bunch of time moving around doing different stuff. Ended up at the end flying helicopters.
Oh, wow.
Did that for a while. And
So you're a pilot still, or like,
well, I have a pilot license, but I'm not up to date on my.
yeah, because that's like a
I haven't
yearly,
flown since I got
yearly
out.
thing or something. Yeah.
You got to take your check rides and keep your physical up to date. But
Wow.
I don't want to. I'm fine when somebody else is paying for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then you know, I was just like, I get out of the Army. I'm tired of this, and let's go focus on something different.
Yeah.
And so we decided to come back to Portland, and ended up I was just kind of like driving around the city. Where do I want to live? And just kind of stumbled into Selwood, and I was like, this neighborhood's really cool.
It is
Um,
cool. Yeah, I always
yeah,
love Selwood.
took a few years to get to the point where I was like able to actually like buy a house, but finally bought a house, and that's great. Uh, yeah, right there. Ride the when the weather's good. Take the spring water right there. Ride my bike downtown
Oh,
to go to
okay,
work.
okay.
Once a year, I paddleboard to work just for fun.
Paddleboard to work,
Yeah,
really?
and take it in with me and stick it in the bike parking. Just everybody gets a kick out of it.
That is funny.
Yeah,
So you go across the river and then go downtown from there. Is that what you're saying?
with paddleboarding.
Yeah.
I just put in right at the Selwood Bridge. Go up, get out at the Hawthorne Bridge, like the little
Okay.
grassy area there, and just
Okay.
walk up.
That is funny.
Yeah,
Um.
but it's a great neighborhood, and yeah, this is our locked in spot. So
Yeah. No, I was thinking it's. I feel like Selwood's grown a lot in a good way. Like I don't know. Whenever I drive through it, like I'll go over the bridge occasionally, and it just seems like a lot of good businesses have opened there in since like I don't know, a decade or so.
yeah,
But it's also like I don't know. I've always thought it's funny because you call it Selwood, but it's in Portland.
yeah.
It's like this weird little like
When it
its
was,
own name thing, and
yeah, my understanding is and they've got little historical things on the bridge. So
okay,
if you're ever
or
on the bridge, you
plaques
could
or
read them. Yeah,
yeah.
it was like an independent community at one time
Okay,
that was like linked by streetcar to like downtown.
and then it got incorporated into Portland at some point.
Yeah, somehow, some
Okay.
kind of way.
Yeah, it's a cool area. Is Oaks Park technically that's part of Selwood, I guess, right?
Yeah, I'd
All that.
call it that.
Okay.
And what a cool thing to have in the neighborhood. That was
Yeah.
my son's first job
Working there.
working at Oaks Park, which would be a fun
It's
teenager
cool, yeah.
job.
They still got the skating rink, I'm guessing, yeah, and all that
Yeah.
stuff, and yeah, it's a cool place.
Pretty good roller coaster.
Yeah, I've actually never been to that. I've been to like the park, like the little walking park, and then I've
Yeah.
been to the roller skating rink a bunch, but
Okay.
I've never been to the little because like I feel like it's for younger kids. But I want to try the roller coaster now that you mentioned
Yeah.
that. We got to have one at work, and it's
It was better than I would have guessed.
okay.
It's a good roller coaster.
Okay, it's a good review.
Yeah.
Tell me about your favorite thing in the Northwest. Could be person, place, thing, anything.
Man, I spent so long living in the South that like it's
Oh,
just
really?
so nice to be the military. Spent a lot of time in the South.
Bases and stuff.
Yeah, and man, it's just so nice to be somewhere that has mountains again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I grew up on the West Coast, and I really appreciate like the West Coast culture.
Mm-hmm.
I find it to be very, I don't know, it's very open. Um, you know, foods and other cultures, and it's a very tolerant place, and so I love that about it. And then, you know, to be able to go up to the mountains, to go to the coast, to have all this, sort of like great natural environment
Mm-hmm.
at hand
Yeah.
is wonderful.
All types of climate right
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
And my least favorite thing is the winter
Yeah.
sky.
We can definitely sit. It's funny because the last week before the storm, that's what Krista said, and she, I was gonna text her and be like, "You were totally right," because yeah, this past week has been a doozy. But
Yeah. Could be worse. I guess we could be in Wisconsin or something.
yeah, that's true. I felt like I don't know. I was watching a lot of NFL during this time, and like that Chiefs game with the Dolphins. I was a big Dolphins fan, but I felt like the whole country was like cold at the same time. And I know it's winter, but
Yeah.
it just I kind of identified, I guess, with like Wisconsin. For a small moment, I was like, I feel your pain. But
Yeah.
I'm glad it's gone now. So anyway, I always end with this. Are you crunchy or smooth peanut butter guy? Team crunchy or team smooth?
I mean,
Or maybe you don't like it.
both are good.
You're kind of you're cool.
I
with
mean, I think
both
they're smooth in my
in your cupboard.
in my house right now.
Okay.
Uh,
A lot of people are like, well, that's what my kids wanted though, so you don't
Yeah.
really have a say.
but I will take either form
Okay.
which is provided to me.
You're a peanut butterist or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
Peanut butter tolerant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No. Yeah, I really appreciate you having me here, and great to great to talk about all this stuff, and
Yeah, you're always welcome.
I'm
Yeah.
excited to see what happens.
Yeah, maybe we'll do it'll be a long year, so maybe you can come back and do
It
another
is
one.
going to
Yeah.
be a long year.
Do an update.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, man.
Yeah. Thank you.